Okay, great. Thanks, Chris, for the introduction. Again, thank you, AAM, for bringing us together here. And I'm really honored and pleased to be up here with Mariana and Rand to talk about millennials. I like to start with a quick introduction about my organization. We're a private foundation based in New York City. Our mission is to foster improvements in learning and enrichment for disadvantaged children and the vitality for the arts for everyone. And as Chris very eloquently said, our approach is to help answer a question that, if solved, could help propel progress in a field. What that means is we fund organizations that allow us to look very deeply into what they're doing and why, so that we can share some of what our organizations are learning from their experience with a broader field, so we can benefit more than those that we can fund directly. And that's part of why I'm here today. I'll be speaking from two initiatives that the Wallace Foundation have funded in the arts. The focus has been on building audiences. The first initiative is the Wallace Excellence Awards, which the Clay Studio actually was a recipient. And we did see evidence for the 46 organizations for whom we have reliable data that they were able to achieve audience growth over 3 years. And that initiative was with both museums and performing arts organizations. And the other initiative that I'll be speaking from is the one that we're currently in, Building Audiences for Sustainability. We're funding 25 performing arts organizations, unfortunately no museums in there for now, 25 performing arts organizations across the country really looking at this question. So it takes the experience of the Wallace Excellence Awards and then adds in that financial component to it. And I'll be speaking from these 3 publications, and because this is an intro, I have limited time, I'm going to breeze through them, but everything is available on our website, wallacefoundation.org, and apparently on the tables if you leave us with your survey responses. So the first is The Road to Results, Effective Practices for Building Arts Audiences, and this publication looked at the most successful organizations in our Wallace Excellence Awards. When we took a look at the practices that those most successful organizations did, we saw that there were really 9 common themes that came up over and over again in their work. This infographic is the sum of those 9 themes, and again, because I'm breezing through this, and I think you have copies to read through on your time as well. Really quickly, just to orient yourself, practices 1 through 6 are really about looking outward and externally at the target audience that you want to look for, in this case, millennials, but however you define that target audience that your organization is really trying to build in, it starts with recognizing when change is needed. A lot of this has to do with market research as well. And then practices 7, 8, 9 are looking more internally at your organization and building in a culture of constantly testing and learning, and building in that culture of recognizing if you really want to attract a new target audience and you're successful at doing so over time, that will change your organization as well. So planning for that to happen. We talk a lot about the importance and the value of using market research, and at the same time we recognize market research is probably one of the hardest things to get funding for. So again, in practicing what we're preaching, taking out the guesswork, I think is an important publication to say that we have out there. This is a practical guide to market research, both if you happen to have the funding to do it, how to contract high quality work if it's your first time going about this, or if you have extremely limited resources, financial resources, but resources, how to find time resources amongst your staff if you're able to do market research, some of the market research studies in-house. So I think this is actually a really great resource that we have. And then what you're here for today is the report that we also have online, Building Millennial Audiences. This report, again, comes from our current initiative. We're in it right now, so we don't have final lessons to share with you all. But the 25 organizations, they are performing arts organizations that we're funding, got market research tailored and catered to their specific audience segment and their specific questions that they had. So there is some variability across these market research studies. For instance, even the definition of millennial that people used varied a little bit according to their target market. I think that 10 to 60 range is broad. We had one organization that defined it as like 19 to 23, which is a little bit random, those four years. So there is some variability, but we synthesized, the majority of our organizations are going after younger audiences and the millennial population. So we synthesized those market research studies. And I'll run through a sampling of the slides, and again, the full report is available online. And I think the first point is we completely recognize millennials are not a monolithic group. There's a lot of variety even within the millennial segment, but they do differ from prior generations in some pretty major ways. And I highlight 2 ways here. Number one, millennials face more financial challenges. So comparing other generations when they were in that 18 to 34 age range in the 90s versus 2013, we are seeing that millennials are starting with lower salaries, lower net worth, and with higher student loan debt. Millennials are also more ethnically diverse than any other generation. That's a little bit incorrect. More ethnically diverse than any other older generation, and think about diversity differently. 43% of millennials are non-white, the highest share of any older generation. And millennials think about diversity beyond just race and ethnicity. It also has to do with social attitudes, religion, sexual orientation, and the full study goes into some of the other ways that millennials are different. Across the market research studies that we funded, we kept seeing over and over again some common barriers to attendance among prospects. And that's in quotes because the way an organization defined prospect, there was some variability, but the same reasons kept coming up over and over again. This is the complete list, and I think there's a build in here. And this was true regardless of where the organization was located. Again, we're funding across the US. It was true regardless of their budget size, and also true regardless of the kind of performing art that they offered, whether it was a traditional symphony orchestra or a modern dance company. These same reasons kept coming up. And I'm going to do a deeper dive into just these top 3. I think that's all I have time for today. So first, the main barrier that millennials kept saying over and over again was that the cost was too high. And the cost was too high is actually a simplification of a lot of things. There's the actual cost issue, the cost of the ticket, the cost of the whole evening out, which can include babysitters, dinner, et cetera, or even the cost compared to the kind of seat that you get. But underneath that cost is actually some broader underlying considerations about value, risk, and trade-offs, and the perceptions around these things. And risk is a really important concept that keeps coming up. This quote here, millennials are willing to spend more freely for rock concerts or special events that they know they'll enjoy, but they won't spend as much for an event that they're not sure about. So risk is closely tied to familiarity. And what we're seeing in the experience of our organizations is not just familiarity with the art form, it's familiarity with the entire experience. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. Also, this is further proof that when people say the cost is too high, there's a lot more going on underneath there. Prospects for several organizations thought tickets cost more than they do. And this chart is an illustration from one particular study where every generation thought that the cost of the ticket was higher than it actually was. And millennials actually thought it was more than 2 times as much as what it actually was. On the barrier that they didn't have time to go or that they're busy with other things, that actually is a reflection of the intense competition for time and spending. And again, across the studies, we saw the same things come up over and over again. And restaurants and bars is in bold because that was the number one barrier that we saw, a number one competitive event with the performing arts organizations. When millennials were asked, what other cultural activities do you do? Going out to eat was considered a cultural activity. And then the third barrier was not being familiar with or aware of the organization. And there's a couple things that have to do with that. The first, More than other generations, millennials like to prepare and consult more sources before a cultural activity. And this is actually based on LaPlaca-Cohen's Culture Track survey. And I bring back this illustration with familiarity with experience. What we've seen in the example of our current grantees is millennials saying, I am actually interested in that modern dance piece that you're showing this season. It's not that modern dance is turning me off. That is interesting to me, but I don't know if I'm going to feel like an idiot. I don't know when I'm supposed to clap. I don't know what I'm supposed to wear. So it is the entire experience that they're unfamiliar with. And then the third is awareness of the organization. I think this one's a little painful. It's having a crush on someone and realizing they don't even know you exist. A lot of organizations thought they weren't attracting millennials because they gave off a perception of being stuffy or being unwelcoming to younger generations. And actually, when the concept of the organization or the concept of the season was presented in the focus groups, millennials or whatever the target audience said, actually, that sounds really cool. I would definitely go to that. I just had no idea this organization existed or no idea this organization existed and offered this kind of programming. On the flip side, some of the things that attract millennials, again, we saw commonalities across all the market research studies about what are those motivators to attendance for the millennial audience. And here's the full list of the key reasons why millennials are attending the performing arts institutions that are currently being funded by Wallace. And you'll see the commonality in here that the reasons for attending reflect deeper desires for personal growth and unusual experiences. And again, experience is kind of the common theme through this whole thing. And the slide is labeled takeaways, but it's more, if I have time to go into it, these are the things I would probably speak more about. I breezed through that 9 effective practices chart. I would say start with a very clear problem statement. Why exactly is your organization going after millennial audiences? For instance, one of the organizations that we're currently funding, they were actually successful in attracting the share of millennial audiences that they wanted in their season, but those millennials were buying cheaper tickets, attending less frequently, and they were not yet donors compared to the other generations they were attracting. So they were losing money in the short term. So that organization had to be very, very clear across the organization. Why is it important to go after millennials? The second, market research can help. It can help you get clear on where you are today, and that also helps answer the why and where you want to go. It can test your assumptions on why millennials or your target audience are coming or aren't coming to your organization. And it can also help you measure and get feedback on what you're doing and how things are tracking so that you can adjust things in real time to what's working. And that leads to the last bullet. Rarely do you go after something new and you're successful the first time. So a lot of what we're encouraging with our grant recipients is to follow this cycle of testing and learning, to test, refine, repeat, because it will take a couple iterations to get to the formula that's right for your organization and your community. And I went through those very quickly, but stay tuned as we're learning more in our current initiative. We'll be publishing those insights online. And again, everything that we've learned from Wallace Excellence Awards with independent evaluators, with research, we're also publishing, and we are happy to share as well. Hi, I'm Christine Yoon. I am Senior Program Officer of the Arts at the Wallace Foundation. A couple of things in looking at the context. According to studies by the NEA, participation in the arts has been declining steadily over time. On top of that, we've seen increased intense competition for leisure time and cultural activities. And in 2004, Wallace interviewed or surveyed over 400 arts leaders. And what we found were that 58% said that building audiences was a priority for them, but only 28% felt that they were doing it successfully. Also in that survey, we heard less than half, I think about 48% felt that they even knew the strategies that they could use to employ to build audiences. So therefore, in Wallace's approach, we try to fund organizations that allow us to look deeply into what they're doing and why, so we can share some of those lessons with the broader field and benefit the broader field in building audiences. I think in selecting who to target, first you need to make sure that it's authentic to your organization and your organization's purpose, mission, and values. So we break down basically targeting your audience into, are you looking to broaden your audience, get more of who you have today? Are you looking to deepen your audience, basically the people that you're already getting today, to get them to come more often? Or diversify your audience. Diversify in this context means get the people who aren't coming to your organization today, whatever demographic characteristic that looks like. So I would say in looking at who to target, if you get very clear on what it is that your organization is trying to solve, in some cases it's even helped our organizations to think about what's the problem that you're trying to address and what would it look like if you solve that problem would be, is what's most helpful for organizations to be very intentional about the kind of target audience that they're going after. More practically, the other thing I would suggest is starting with a deep baseline understanding of who you have today, and that really helps to think about who else you want to come into the door. Practically speaking, some of our organizations have started with a database analysis to take a very deep look into who is coming through the door today, how are those people coming, how often are they coming back, and with that understanding they have a more clear sense of who it is, who else it is that they want coming to their organization. I think any relationship is based on trust, and in this context, trust means authenticity, and Rand spoke about that a lot in the panel just now. I think being authentic to hearing what it is that millennials want from the experience of going to your organization, and also being authentic to who your organization is and what your organization stands for. A really great example of that actually comes from the experience of one of our Wallace Excellence Award grantees. There's a deeper case study available online. But the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum designed a salon series to really address millennials' interest in having a more social experience. They offered drinks at their events, which I know might cause some agitation for museums, but they did that in a way that was also true to who they were. They had some prompts so that people attending and walking through the galleries could give observations and share some of their feelings and opinions on the work that they were seeing. And this is really true and in line with the mission and the original vision of the founder of Isabella Stewart, who really wanted her collection to be a salon. I would say three things. Well, the first, go online and look at the 9 effective practices. But really in those 9 effective practices, you'll see the first thing is to really get clear on what it is that you're trying to solve. What is the problem that your organization is facing? And to be clear on that. And then related, number 2, get your whole organization aligned around that problem statement and around why you are targeting this specific audience. And if you have that organizational buy-in, which is from the top, the bottom, and across the organization, I think that will really help in your efforts. And related, the third thing is to build in a culture of learning. It will take a couple iterations to try this work. Rarely will you find success on the first try. So if you're clear on the problem, if you're clear on having organizational alignment, and then third, you have this culture of learning, you will have the things in place to really test and learn and to improve upon building in that new audience segment. So I think there's really, I would break it down into 3 challenges. And the first is I've emphasized a lot about building in a culture of learning and testing and learning. And the first challenge is how long to really test this. When do you know when it's time to cut your losses, or when do you know when you're really close to that breakthrough and you just need to try it another time? That's related to the second challenge, which is of course capitalizing the risk. How long to test really has to do with how much room you have and how much financial legroom you have to really continue to test and take on this risk of building in a new audience. Wallace tries to help in this area, while with our direct grantees, we fund some of that risk capital that's needed. Knowing that we can't fund everyone, we try to share some of the research of what we have. Knowing that market research, again, is one of the hardest things to fund. Some of our publications address, if you're not able to get a grant from Wallace, we do have a practical guide on market research and how you can get some of the intelligence that you need from your target demographic in a cheaper or lower cost way. And I would say the third challenge is if you are successful in attracting your audience, then the challenge is, what do you do next? Audiences and the competitive landscape is constantly changing. You can't continue to do the same activities that you've been doing to get that audience. Or in some cases, attracting the audience and seeing the makeup of your audience change over time also changes the makeup of your organization and your organization's culture as well. I think there's a lot of organizations that have tried this work and found failures and successes along the way. Some of those organizations are our own grant recipients, and we've published and shared as much as we can everything that we've learned from these organizations. That's all available on our website, wallacefoundation.org. And a couple studies that I would direct people's attention to would be the first, the road to results, the 9 effective practices that we've seen common across all our successful organizations, taking out the guesswork, which is a practical guide to market research. And then we have a third, a study on building millennial audiences, which is a synthesis of market research that we funded across our grant recipients.